In the midst of a bustling New York street, a sharp voice rang out over the sound of city traffic. A crowd had gathered near the corner of Fifth Avenue, their eyes drawn to the striking figure of a well-known liberal journalist, James Halloway. His face was an echo of defiance, his words dripping with venom as he pointed toward a young boy walking with a quiet air of solitude. "Look at that," James sneered, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. A future political pawn. Too young to understand the weight of his family's legacy, but already ready to inherit the throne of privilege. Barron Trump, ladies and gentlemen. The crowd, curious as always, turned to see the subject of his ridicule. Barron Trump, son of the former president. At first, there was silence. The young boy walked calmly, unaware of the media spectacle unfolding around him. But when he heard the mockery, something changed. His usual stoic demeanor faltered for just a second, his eyes flickering in a way that suggested vulnerability. James Halloway, a journalist known for his sharp criticisms of the Trump family, was seizing the moment. His tone was scornful, yet tinged with arrogance as he continued. "Can you believe this is the future of America? Another rich kid with no idea about the struggles of real people, fed lies, and kept shelter from the world. We should all be afraid." The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh along or feel uneasy. But it was clear they were waiting for something more, something bold, something memorable. The journalist had turned a typical street scene into a spectacle, and Barron Trump, despite his age, had become the center of it. But what happened next stunned everyone into silence. As Barron continued walking, he slowed to a stop just a few feet from where James stood, his gaze now directly focused on the journalist. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, and the crowd fell completely still. Some expected Barron to react, perhaps with anger, with confusion, or even with a retort. Instead, the young boy did something entirely unexpected. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of paper folded carefully. With gentle hands, he unfolded it, revealing a note he'd been carrying for who knows how long. His eyes, still calm and thoughtful, met the journalist's. "Excuse me, sir," Barron said quietly, his voice strong but laced with vulnerability. "I understand that you have an opinion about me and my family, but I wanted to show you something that might make you rethink what you just said." For a long moment, there was silence. The crowd was breathless, unsure what would come next. Barron handed the note to James, who hesitated, looking at it like it might be a trap. But after a few seconds, he reached out and took it, unfolding it with uncertainty. It was a letter, written in neat handwriting. "Dear Mr. Halloway, I don't know you, but I do know what it feels like to be judged before you can speak for yourself. It's not easy being the son of someone so polarizing, but I try to remember that everyone has a story. We don't always see the things people carry with them, the pain or the burdens they bear. You may not know this, but I've spent most of my life learning to be kind to others, even when they don't show kindness to me. I think that's what we need more of, kindness, especially in times like these. I hope this note reaches you in a way that helps you see the humanity in all of us, even those we disagree with. With respect, Barron Trump." The crowd around them was still, waiting for some kind of reaction, unsure of how to respond. James stared at the letter, and for the first time, his face faltered. He had prepared himself for a confrontation, for a defiant gesture, but not for this. This moment of humility and unexpected wisdom from a boy not yet out his teens. For James, the words on the page were a punch to the gut. His usual sharpness, his political jabs, the ease with which he could tear down those he disagreed with, all of it seemed suddenly so trivial in comparison to the quiet strength of the young boy standing before him. This wasn't the Barron Trump he had expected to see, a spoilt, entitled heir to a throne of power. This was a human being, someone who had been shaped by experiences James could never fully comprehend. I don't know what to say," James muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd, sensing the shift, exchanged looks. It was a rare moment, one of genuine reflection, and for a brief, fleeting second, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, caught in the beauty of that human connection. Barron didn't speak again. He simply turned and walked away, his back straight, his head held high. The crowd slowly began to disperse. murmuring among themselves. But no one could shake the lingering impact of the moment. James stood there, holding the letter in his hands, his mind racing. What had just happened? How had a simple act of kindness left him so disarmed? It felt like something had shifted inside him, something deep and profound. Over the next few days, James couldn't stop thinking about Barron's words. He replayed the encounter over and over in his mind, torn between the narrative he had built for himself, one that painted the Trump family in broad, negative strokes, and the humanizing reminder Barron had offered him. James had prided himself on being tough, on having the courage to speak truth to power. But now, he wondered if there was a deeper truth he had been missing all along. The more he thought about Barron's note, the more he realized that perhaps his approach had been wrong. Maybe it wasn't enough to simply critique from the sidelines, to tear people down for the sake of his own beliefs. Maybe what the world needed more was understanding, compassion, and empathy, things Barron had shown in the most unlikely of places. That night, for the first time in a long while, James sat down at his desk and began to write. Not an article meant to stir controversy, but something more personal, something vulnerable. His fingers moved slowly over the keys as he began to pen his thoughts. The following week, James Halloway published a piece in his column. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about attacking anyone. It was about what happened on the streets of New York, about the lesson he had learned from Barron Trump. The article was titled "The Power of Kindness, a Lesson from Barron Trump," and it opened with these words. In a world where we are all too quick to judge, we sometimes forget that kindness is the greatest weapon we have. Last week, I had the privilege of learning that from someone I least expected. Barron Trump, a young man whose actions reminded me of the importance of empathy and the power of selflessness in a time when division seems to be the norm. As the article gained traction, people from all walks of life began to share it. Some readers were surprised by James' change of heart, while others felt moved by his willingness to open up about his personal journey. The piece went viral, and soon it was being discussed across social media, on news outlets, and even in dinner table conversations. What happened next was extraordinary. James Halloway, a journalist known for his biting commentary, found himself at the center of a larger movement. It was as though the world had collectively decided to put down its weapons and listen to each other, if only for a moment. Barron Trump, without ever intending to, had sparked a wave of kindness that rippled through the media, through politics, and through ordinary lives. In the months that followed, James reached out to Barron's family, offering a genuine apology for the harshness he had once shown. He didn't expect forgiveness, but he hoped to make amends, to show that his growth was sincere. Barron, who had always been a quiet figure in the public eye, responded with a simple message: "I understand. Thank you for your honesty." That small gesture, the act of recognizing the humanity in someone else, had done what no political argument, no protest, or no inflammatory headline could ever do. It had changed the hearts of countless people, and it had transformed James Halloway from a critic to a compassionate voice. In the end, the lesson was clear. It wasn't about being right. It wasn't about tearing others down to prove a point. It was about kindness, the kind of kindness that transcends politics, that defies expectations, and that has the power to heal even the deepest divisions. Barron Trump, a young boy who had endured more than his share of public scrutiny, had shown the world that in a time when everything seems to be at odds, kindness can be the thread that binds us all. And as for James Halloway, he learned that sometimes the most unexpected encounters hold the most profound lessons, lessons that have the power to change not only a single life, but the world at large. The street corner on Fifth Avenue, that day wasn't just a place for judgment. It became the birthplace of something much more powerful, hope. And it left everyone who witnessed it a little quieter, a little kinder, and a lot more aware of the power of empathy. The end. James couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. It wasn't just the article he'd written or the surprising turn of events that followed. It was a deeper change, one that felt like a permanent shift in his perspective. It was a reminder that compassion was more than just a nice idea. It was an action. He realized how often he had spent his career pushing narratives that divided people without ever really thinking about the consequences of his words. But now, every word felt heavier. He was learning to look past the surface and ask, what's really going on here? What does this person truly need to hear? As the weeks passed, James found himself reflecting on the people he had hurt with his sharp, sometimes cruel remarks. He decided it was time to rebuild bridges, even with those who had once been his fiercest critics. This wasn't about winning anyone over or changing the world overnight. It was simply about extending an olive branch to those who had been caught in the crossfire of his past rhetoric. One of his first steps was reaching out to old colleagues, some of whom had left their jobs in part because of the toxic environment that political battles had created. He apologized to them, and to his surprise, many were more than willing to reconnect. They had been waiting for a moment like this, for someone to take the first step toward healing. But the most surprising connection was the one he made with Barron Trump's family. Barron, despite being thrust into the public spotlight in ways he had no control over, was growing into a young man of character. His quiet response to James had spoken volumes, and James found himself respecting the courage it took to stand up in that moment without uttering a word of defense. Barron's family, too, had extended kindness and grace to James, offering a quiet but profound understanding that he hadn't expected. He met with Barron's mother, Melania Trump, for a coffee one morning at a quiet cafe in Manhattan. They spoke not of politics, but of their shared experiences as parents trying to raise children under an unrelenting public gaze. Melania, with her calm demeanor, told him, "People forget we are human. We make mistakes. We learn. But what we don't need is judgment. We all need compassion." James was struck by how, in their quiet conversations, he was hearing lessons about the importance of empathy from those he had once criticized most harshly. "I never imagined this would be how we'd meet," James admitted, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "But I've come to realize that understanding each other is the only way we can make a real difference." Melania smiled softly. "It's never too late to start," she said, her words lingering in the air between them. As the months rolled on, something remarkable began to happen. What started as a single moment of kindness, a young boy handing a letter to a journalist, began to spread. The impact of that encounter reached far beyond the crowded streets of New York. James Holloway, once a symbol of sharp criticism, became known for his efforts to bridge divides, to listen more than he spoke, and to encourage others to do the same. His newfound reputation didn't come without challenges. There were still those who doubted his sincerity, who claimed that his transformation was just a calculated move for publicity. But James had come to understand that the only true measure of change was not in public recognition, but in how deeply it affected the lives of the people around him. He had begun to build relationships not on the premise of political agreement, but on mutual respect and understanding. At one of his public speaking events, an unexpected request from a nonprofit organization focused on healing political divides, he stood before a diverse group of individuals. His usual sharp-edged rhetoric had been replaced with a softer, more thoughtful tone. He spoke candidly about the mistakes he had made and how he had been so focused on winning arguments that he had forgotten what really mattered: connection. "I spent years tearing people down for the sake of an ideology," he confessed, his voice unwavering. "But I've learned that we don't build anything lasting by destroying what others believe. We build by listening, by finding common ground, and by offering kindness, especially when it's hardest to do so." The crowd, filled with people from all walks of life, liberals, conservatives, moderates, listened in rapt silence. And when he finished, a woman in the front row stood up. She was older, with graying hair and glasses perched on her nose, and her voice was steady as she spoke. "You're right," she said, her words carrying a deep sincerity. "It's easy to tear down what we don't understand, but what you've done is harder. You've given us hope that we can change, that we can learn to live with respect for each other." The room broke into applause. For the first time in years, James felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't about his redemption. It was about creating a space where everyone, regardless of their past mistakes, could grow and learn together. Years later, when James looked back on that moment in New York, standing on that street corner, holding Barron Trump's letter, he realized just how much had changed, both within him and in the world around him. Barron had been a symbol of hope, not because of his position or his family, but because of the simple act of extending kindness to someone who had ridiculed him. James had spent so many years speaking out against injustice, but he had never fully understood the power of kindness in the face of adversity. Barron had shown him that sometimes the most profound acts of courage aren't the loudest or most dramatic. They're the quiet moments of grace that challenge us to see the humanity in others. One day, as James was walking through Central Park, he saw a familiar face ahead. Barron, now a young man, walking with his head held high, just as he had that day. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it felt like no time had passed. James smiled, and Barron returned it with a nod of recognition. They didn't need words. The transformation they had both undergone was evident. It wasn't about politics, fame, or public opinion. It was about a shift in the way they saw the world and each other. And as they walked past one another, the city noise fading into the background, James couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude for that one moment on a crowded New York street. It had been a turning point, not just for him, but for the world. A reminder that no matter how divided we may seem, there is always the possibility of kindness, understanding, and, ultimately, unity. James had found his peace, and in that peace, he knew that no matter how much the world changed, the power of compassion would always be the greatest force for good.